All right, welcome back to another edition of We Rise Fighting Labor podcast. We bring you today's labor news, history, and analysis from the U.S. and around the world. This is a podcast you listen to with your fellow workers organizing on the shop floor. This is a podcast you listen to before walking into your union meeting. As always, I am Rick Urrutia, here with my co-host Brian Pfeiffer. Today we're bringing you some bits of labor news, followed by an interview with Jeff Kurtz of Railroad Workers United, who spoke to us about some of the root causes of the recent trail derailments in the U.S. We'll check out news about Starbucks workers, CNHi, striking airport workers in Germany, and much more after we check out a poem by Gil Scott-Heron. This one's in recognition of Black History Month.
I was wondering about our yesterdays and digging through the rubble. And to say the least, somebody went to a hell of a lot of trouble to make sure that when we looked things up, we wouldn't fare too well, and we would come up with totally unreliable pictures of ourselves. But I've compiled what few facts I could, such as they are, to see if we could find out a little bit of something, and this is what I got so far. First, white folks discovered Africa. They claimed it fair and square. Cecil Rhodes couldn't have been robbing nobody because, hell, there wasn't nobody there. And white folks brought all the civilization because there wasn't none around. How could the folks be civilized when wasn't nobody writing nothing down? And just to prove all of their suspicions, well, didn't take too long. They found out that there were whole tribes of people in plain sight running around with no clothes on. That's right. The men, the women, the young, and the old righteous folks covered their eyes. And no time was spent considering the environment. Hell no, this just wasn't civilized. And another piece of information they had, or at least this is what we were taught, is that unlike the civilized people of Europe, these tribal units actually fought. And yes, there was some crude implements, and yes, there was primitive art, and yes, they were masters of hunting and fishing, and courtesy came from the heart. And yes, there was love and medicine, religion, intertribal communication by drum, but no paper, no pencils, and no other utensils, and hell, these folks never even heard of a gun. And this is why the colonies came, to stabilize the land, because the dark continent had copper and gold, and the discoverers had themselves a plan. They would discover all the places with promise. You didn't need no titles and deeds. Then they would appoint people to make everything legal, to sanction the trickery and greed. And back in the jungle, when the natives got restless, they would call it guerrilla attack. And they would never describe that the folks finally got wise and decided that they would fight back. And still, we are victims of word games. Semantics is always a bitch. Places once referred to as underdeveloped are now called mineral rich. And the game goes on eternally. Unity kept just beyond reach. Egypt and Libya used to be in Africa. They've now been moved to the Middle East. There are examples galore, I assure you. But if interpreting were left up to me, I'd be sure every time folks knew this version wasn't mine, which is why it is called His Story.
All right, welcome back, everyone. And the first bit of news we present tonight is concerning the UAW Local 180 strike against CNHi in Racine, Wisconsin. For those who are unfamiliar, CNHi manufactures tractors, and our podcast had been covering the strike there since September of last year. Brian and I paid a visit to striking workers in December, and the strike ended last month with a signed contract. But in preparation for tonight's podcast, I came across an article that I hadn't seen before. It's from about a month ago, and it was written by NPR in Wisconsin, and part of it reads as follows. While the new deal was ultimately approved, it wasn't a unanimous decision. The majority of members of UAW Local 180 in Racine voted against the new contract, but they were outvoted by members of UAW Local 807 in Iowa, who voted to ratify the deal, according to Rich Glowacki, chairman of UAW Local 180's bargaining committee. He said the agreement was a result of pressure from the company, and here's a quote. They sent letters to our members informing them that they were going to start permanently replacing them, Glowacki said. If someone holds a knife to your throat and threatens you with your job, that tends to make people think about things in a different light. That pressure helped turn union members' votes, he said. The scare tactic worked, especially in Burlington, Glowacki said. Racine did not approve it. While the company and UAW International have framed the new contract as a win, Glowacki said it doesn't feel that way for many in Racine. He said some of the things union members were fighting against, including a tiered healthcare package, made it into the deal. The new agreement increases employee pay, But Glowacki said it leaves Racine's CNHi employees underpaid compared to other area manufacturers. You could go to work at Haribo gummy plant and make $26.85 an hour, but you won't make that making a $500,000 tractor, he said. Now, if you're a regular listener, you know that we cover strikes just about every time we do the news. We also did an episode on November 7th of last year that focused specifically on dealing with the question of how strikes are won. I chose to report on this NPR article because there's a question in there that could have gone in that November episode, and that question is, how do we deal with the threat of replacement workers when on strike? I wish I could offer one cookie cutter answer to this question, but the truth is, this is the type of question union members need to hash out in conversation and planning ahead of a strike so the union effectively addresses it. Though I will say this, I believe this is one of the reasons it's so critical for unions to form alliances with community groups. That way, other workers in the community aren't crossing the picket line or permanently replacing striking workers. One of the reasons we follow news from the United Auto Workers and other industrial unions in the Midwest is because they're often credited with creating the quote unquote middle class jobs in the United States and middle class lifestyles in the United States. They did this through organizing, striking, and negotiating better contracts, wages, benefits, living standards, and other gains for their members. So these industrial contracts give us a standard for what a union job and quote unquote middle class lifestyles look like. So we watch these negotiations to keep our fingers on the pulse for these standards. When these unions are in negotiations, their contracts and their struggles are on full display for both workers and companies, and this helps us to take measurements of where things are at. So in other words, are industrial unions in the US on the defense? Are they making concessions? How much are union members making? Did those wages go up, down, stay the same? What kind of fight did they put on? What did it get them? Were they victorious? Did they get defeated, decertified? What group of workers is next for negotiations? Those are the types of questions that we have to ask ourselves when we're watching these types of strikes and negotiations. It's also important for us to watch this stuff because, as we've shared before, one group of workers who are successful in their struggle can embolden another group. And on the flip side of that, if the workers are defeated, it could discourage others. So it's helpful to watch how labor struggles shake out in places like CNHi, Caterpillar, John Deere, Ford, GM, and other major manufacturers, so we keep our fingers on the pulse of industrial unions, which have historically set some labor and economic standards for workers in the US. And we can rest assured that executives and shareholders for CNHi and Caterpillar were watching, for instance, the negotiations at John Deere to see what the company did. You know, what kind of tactics it carried out against the union, what kind of contract it negotiated. Because, again, as we've mentioned in this podcast, those contracts set precedents. So the contract at John Deere set a precedent for the contract and the struggle at CNHi, and the contract and the struggles of John Deere and CNHi will set a precedent for what's happening at Caterpillar right now. We can rest assured that the executives and shareholders of those companies watched those negotiations, and that Caterpillar executives watched what happened at CNHi. I think it's safe to assume that. I think it's safe to assume that those executives at Caterpillar saw CNHi management threaten UAW workers with permanent replacements and took note of that as a potential tactic to use against Caterpillar workers if it comes to a strike there. So we have to keep an eye on this sort of thing so we know how to struggle ourselves, and because an injury to one is an injury to all. So in other words, we want to see striking workers in the Midwest or any unions be successful in their struggle, so we have to extend our solidarity and stay informed. Up next is Brian with some news about Mumia Abu-Jamal.
All right, thanks, Rick. On February 16th, solidarity statements were issued because it was a worldwide day of solidarity for brother Mumia Abu-Jamal, who also is a fellow union member. Many unions and community organizations, including from the National Metal Workers Union of South Africa, which is 350,000 members, and the National Railway Motive Power Union of Chiba in Japan, issued solidarity statements for Mumia. The ILWU Local 10 shut down ports in Oakland and San Francisco. to demand political prisoner Mumia Abu-Jamal be released. Mumia is a journalist, scholar, and union member, and he has been unjustly placed in prison for over 40 years, some on death row, and now he's in general population. He's been routinely tortured by the state, but refuses to stop fighting for his and others' freedom. And the testament to his character is that when he was actually on death row, and there was a strike going on at an affiliate, a major national affiliate TV station, and the workers there, the technicians were on strike. Mumia was on death row at the time, and that interview could have saved him from death row. He refused to be interviewed because the work was being done by scabs, technically. This is just one of the many examples of the testament to Mumia Abu-Jamal's character. He's been steadfast in supporting unions for decades, strikes, shutdowns from all kinds of different workers, and we support him here at We Rise Fighting. He's our union brother, and we demand his release just like our friends did on February 16th. So this campaign continues to free our brother Mumia. For more information, including a video of the February 16th port shutdowns, you can go to the Mobilization for Mumia Facebook page. Back to you, Rick.
Indeed, thank you, Brian. I have read Mumia's writings, man, and man, that's some powerful stuff. And I knew, I had read a lot of his stuff as it relates to police brutality and, racial injustice and all that, but I didn't know that stuff about labor. Thank you for sharing. It doesn't surprise me. And if you've never read Mumia's words directly from Mumia, man, I highly recommend that. There's few writers like Mumia Abu-Jamal. Okay, on my plate over here, just wanted to report on a strike at German airports. Reuters this week had an article titled "Strike at German Airports Grounds Nearly 300,000 Passengers." So here's directly from the article. A 24-hour strike at 7 German airports, including Frankfurt and Munich, was set to affect nearly 300,000 passengers on Friday, as unionized workers pressed for higher wages and threatened a summer of chaos if their demands were not met. The strike coincided with the start of the Munich Security Conference, with more than 40 heads of state and 60 ministers expected to attend. About 295,000 passengers are affected by the cancellation of 2,340 flights at Bremen, Dortmund, Frankfurt, Hamburg, Hanover, Munich, and Stuttgart airports, according to the ADV Airports Association. The union has pressed for a 10.5% wage increase, or at least 500 euros a month. Among the airlines affected, Lufthansa, if I'm saying that correctly, said it had been forced to cancel more than 1,300 flights and suspend operations at hub airports Frankfurt and Munich on Friday. The carrier declined to give an estimate of the cost of the strike, but it has on previous occasions said that such actions costed 10 to 15 million euros per day. Now, I have a couple of takeaways from this article. For starters, I wanted to highlight that this is an article about airport workers in Germany, and that it's important to think of and watch the labor movement as an international struggle. In this case, the struggle of German workers is telling us that when these workers go on strike, that immediately affects 300,000 passengers and cost airlines like Lufthansa $10 to $15 million per day. So let's grab those numbers a little bit and run with them. Let's pretend for a second that this strike really is costing Lufthansa 10 to 15 million euros per day. I don't know what Lufthansa airport workers are demanding exactly, but regardless of what it is, be it wage increases, reduced hours, more vacation, increased maternal paternal leave, whatever it may be, whatever these workers may be demanding, my bet is that it doesn't cost the company 15 million euros per day. So the only logical thing for the company to do, as we've discussed on this podcast previously, is to meet the demands of the workers. But this is capitalism, and the end game is profits for shareholders and CEOs, so the system isn't going to be rational, hence the need to strike. So thank you to the German airport workers for bringing some of these labor lessons to the forefront for us. I'd also like to focus on that number 300,000 again, and actually bring it here to my home in Denver. because I used to be a baggage handler or ramp agent, quote unquote, for United Airlines at Denver International Airport. And as such, I was a member of the International Association of Machinists, or IAM, or the Machinists Union. And last I checked, and this was just a couple of weeks ago, contract negotiations between United Airlines and the union were at a standstill, which gets me to this. When I was a baggage handler, I used to comment to my friends and coworkers about the amount of power the union could have. United Airlines is the biggest airline at Denver International Airport, and Denver International Airport itself is the third busiest airport on the planet. So it's the third busiest airport on the planet, and United Airlines is the biggest company at Denver International Airport. A strike by baggage handlers, whether it's legal or not, could, if organized properly, be a huge blow to the company and embolden other union workers at DIA in Denver and in Colorado. Because according to the airport's website, in 2022, 69 million passengers rolled through Denver International Airport. That's an average of almost 200,000 passengers per day, which helps me to refine my point a little bit. Those United planes literally can't take off without the labor of the baggage handlers, because it's the baggage handlers who load the planes and push the planes out into the runway. Now, if you followed our show and heard my process for carrying out strategic corporate research, you already know. When we're researching corporations, we're looking for weaknesses in a company's line of production. More specifically, we're looking for places where if workers went on strike or carried out some kind of direct action, it would be of a huge cost to the company. So all that being said, I think that United Airlines baggage handlers are in a position of incredible power. So not sure why negotiations are or perhaps were at a standstill. I can't comment on that. I generally don't know. I can only speculate. So for that reason, I'll leave it at that. But yes, I did wanted to put out there that, in my mind at least, the ramp agents, the baggage handlers at United Airlines at Denver International Airport are in a position of incredible power. And my final takeaway from this article on Germany and the airport strikes is that the strike in Germany coincided with the start of the Munich Security Conference, with more than 40 heads of state and 60 ministers expected to attend. Now, I don't know if that was part of the tactic in this strike, but that really captures the imagination as far as being a show of political power. All right, because different cities around the world have mass convergences for heads of states to discuss and make decisions about neoliberal economic policies, globalization, security, war, and other issues that oppress and exploit the working class. But it's our very labor that can shut their stuff down. So, for instance, what if the workers shut down the airport anytime the G8 wanted to meet and discuss any of the types of issues I just listed? So just wanted to put it out there, food for thought. Again, this is why I think it's really important to read articles about labor movements and union struggles that happen around the world, because they bring lessons with them no matter what. We start to connect the dots and we can get to pretty exciting places. For instance, United Airlines prides itself actually on this flight that goes directly from Denver to Frankfurt. Can we connect the dots? Can something happen? Can some type of solidarity action happen? I don't know, but just wanted to put all this stuff out there and continue to remind our listeners that it's really important to listen to what's going on in labor news at an international level. All right, Brian, you're next with the Trans Day of Action.
Yes, Rick, our position here at We Rise Fighting is that LGBTQ, including transgender rights, are workers' rights. And we stand in full solidarity with our trans friends, workers, and students, and others who are being attacked all over the country by bigots in legislatures and other arenas. In response to this, a Trans Day of Vengeance is scheduled for April 1st, 2023 in Washington, D.C. And the day before, there will be a variety of activities. But on April 1st, there will be a rally and march will take place. And there's more information at transradicalactivistnetwork.org. That's transradicalactivistnetwork.org. Also, in tandem with that, a very exciting development, there's going to be a Southern Workers School, April 21st to the 23rd in Charlotte, North Carolina. hashtag Organize the South, and Southern Workers Assembly on Facebook. There's also a website. We were honored to have on this show, We Rise Fighting, a few months ago, our friends from North Carolina, and that's where this will be taking place in Charlotte. Southern Workers School, we talked to the Black Workers for Justice and leaders from United Electrical Workers. And at this school, there will be a variety of curriculum on how to organize in the South, but also in many other locations, such as Wisconsin, Iowa, Indiana, many states who have faced Jim Crow attacks, such as right to work for less being passed. This we had in-depth discussions with our friends from Black Workers for Justice that are organizing in some of the most extreme conditions in North Carolina and making advances. So at this school, there will be discussion about how to organize sectorally with tech workers, with nurses that have unions or are just in the process of unionizing, how to create organizing committees, and a variety of other tactics and strategies that we can move forward no matter what the environment is. If collective bargaining is illegal in a state, that doesn't mean we can't organize. There's a lot of variety of different kinds of creative things that we can do as workers, and this school will be taking those up. And it will have a fundamental focus on fighting racism and making sure that workers of color and LGBTQ workers and women will be in the leadership of our worker formations, whatever they might be, whether it's an alliance or an assembly or unions. So thanks, Rick.
Right on. Up next, a couple of news briefs. On my end, just an update on Caterpillar. I did go to the UAW Local's website for an update, didn't see one, so this is coming directly from the company itself. It's investor relations page, so this is directly from Caterpillar. The update on negotiations is that subcommittee negotiations between the company and the union continued this week, with most topics concluded. Main table negotiations on the major economic topics were also initiated this week, with the company providing a revised economic proposal and the union responding with its counterproposal. Next week, the economic negotiations will continue, as well as the finalization of any open subcommittee topics. Another quick labor brief for today is an update on Temple University graduate students. If y'all remember, last week we reported that Temple University graduate students were on strike and had had their benefits cut by the university. This week we would like to report the Philadelphia Inquirer reports that striking graduate students at Temple University have reached a tentative agreement. So graduate students walked out again, had been on strike for 18 days, demanding better pay and benefits. And as we reported last week, the university cut their benefits. The average pay for teaching and research assistants at Temple University is $20,000 a year, according to the most recent numbers from the university. And the union had sought to raise it to just over $32,000, an increase that it said was a necessary cost of living adjustment. I could not argue against that. The university had been offering 3% raises over the 4-year contract. So hopefully that definitely works out in the favor of Temple University graduate students. Glad to hear that they've reached a tentative agreement at least. Brian, back to you.
Okay, our friends at Starbucks Workers United, who we've reported on their various different events taking place across the country. They are phenomenal. Our fellow workers at Starbucks organizing from one end of North America to the other, in the United States in particular. Last week, a federal judge in Michigan ordered Starbucks to stop firing union organizers. The judge issued a national cease and desist order against Starbucks to prevent the company from firing workers in retaliation for their union activity or face imposed fines or criminal sanctions against the company, as well as store district management. This ruling comes in light of a recent decision ordering reinstatement of an illegally fired Starbucks worker who was involved in organizing their store. Starbucks Workers United states on their Facebook page, quote, "Federal courts have repeatedly ruled in our union's favor. Starbucks must continue to be held accountable for their unprecedented amount of labor law violations, and we won't stop fighting until our workplace is free from corporate criminal intimidation," end quote, states Starbucks Workers United. And we're happy to report that there are many activities continuing with Starbucks workers across the country. We wish them well. We will continue to update our listeners here with activity that's taking place. And you can also go to the Facebook page, Starbucks Workers United, and solidarity with our friends there. We're excited also to announce that as we speak, there are women and allies across the world organizing International Working Women's Day events. March 8th is International Working Women's Day. This was a day that was initially built by socialist women such as Clara Zetkin and Rosa Luxemburg in the early 1900s, and many women helped build the idea for International Women's Day. And since then, every year, hundreds of millions of women all over the world and virtually every country hit the streets for rallies, marches, strikes, shutdowns, and a variety of other events. And we're happy here on We Rise Fighting to be in solidarity with our sisters all over the world. There's a variety of events being organized, just a couple in North America. Our March 8th, there's a rally and march in New Orleans, organized by the Louisiana Abortion Rights Action Committee, and a March 11th rally and march in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And there's many, many more actions taking place. So you can find that with your local labor community organization, wherever you might be. Also, the Wisconsin Bailout the People movement has a Facebook page and blog, and they'll be doing everything they can to promote International Women's Day and promoting events and posting them. So you can find out more information at wibailoutpeople.org. Back to you, Rick.
Great. Thank you, Brian. And we're going to leave you off tonight with a quick interview that we did with Jeff Kurtz of Railway Workers United. We decided to get in touch again to speak about, the recent train derailment. And Jeff wanted to offer his insight as to what got us here today to the train derailment in Ohio, along with other train derailments that have unfortunately happened in recent history and recent days. So we're going to leave you off with that. Thank you again always for listening. Solidarity and love to all. Have a good night. All right, everyone. And on our show today, again, is Jeff Kurtz. You may remember he joined us once earlier before. He's representing the Railway Workers United. And just wanted to check in about what happened with the recent derailments and where the history of that is, Railway Workers United role, the union's role in this. Just, Jeff, if you could give us a little history of what got us to today as far as these recent derailments.
Okay, and thank you very much, Rick, for having me on today. This actually goes back to the 1985 agreement that was fostered by the Reagan administration. Their presidential emergency board that they instituted. It was contract negotiations similar to what we just did in 2022. This happened in 1985, and basically what happened is they told the UTU at the time, and now the UTU is Smart Transportation Division, but at the time they were the UTU. They were told by the Reagan administration, here's the Presidential Emergency Board. If you don't accept this, we're going to give you something much worse. So what they did was basically hold a gun to these guys' heads. What they had to end up signing for was an agreement that allowed the railroads to start cutting their jobs. So we used to have 2 brakemen and a conductor on each train. We used to have cabooses on each train. They were far smaller than they are now, but they ran more safely than they did. Well, this allowed the government to, or not the government, this allowed the railroads to start cutting employees. So eventually, and it was on the Santa Fe at the time, we got down to 1 conductor and 1 brakeman by about 1990. Shortly thereafter, it was just the engineer and the conductor, and the cabooses went by the wayside.
Okay, so to clarify here, Jeff, because this is where my knowledge is as far as these current events. All I know right now is that the federal government is doing an investigation. So are you tracing the root of the problem to the amount of staffing for railway workers? Am I understanding you correctly here?
Staffing and eventually I want to get into the length of the trains too, because that was a major factor in this last derailment. The length and tonnage of this train, it was 9,300 feet long, 18,000 tons. So when we ran trains shorter back in the day, like I said, we had people on the rear end of the train, people on the head end. We experienced things like hot journals. We experienced sticky brakes and things like that. But from what I heard from this accident, they saw fire flying from under the car at least 20 miles away. Yeah, and it, and that indicates to me that it was a bad journal, journal connected to the wheel. And back back in the 70s and 80s, when I first hired out, when that would happen, we would have all these eyes on the train. They would see that, especially at the time of the night that this derailment happened. It happened at about 9 o'clock at night. So that gave them 3 hours of darkness where when you're going around curves and everything and you've got that many eyes on it, somebody would have caught this. And what the procedure is, when you catch something like this, you stop your train, the conductor or the brakeman or both go back, inspect the car. And in this case, what they would have done is cut the offending car away from the rest of the train, taken that car to a siding or a yard or some unoccupied track, set it out. They probably would have proceeded to that location at somewhere between 20, 10, 5 miles an hour, depending on how bad the journal and the wheel was damaged. They would have set that car out, tied back onto their train, got the air back into the braking system, and been on their way. And there wouldn't have been any catastrophe. In this situation, because of the fact that this train was so large, you also have the added factor of just horrendous in-train forces. And that's another thing that's going to contribute to derailments when you have a train that large. Cars, I think they said that it was something like 150 cars. When they're coupled up, the coupling mechanism has slack, what we call slack in it. With 150 cars, 1.8 or 1.8 or 9 miles long, whatever it was, you're going to have slack action in there that is, well, let's put it this way. When we were running small trains, that slack action would tear the couplers. It could tear the couplers up very easily. In fact, the knuckle on the coupler that actually does the coupling is solid iron, and it weighs about 60 or 70 pounds. That would just be torn up in a conventional train. In a train that large, there's no controlling those forces. So the thing that we need to look at is, and this is before, I'm sure you've seen in the news, Rick, about the braking system, and everybody's talking about the braking system.
Yeah.
The thing that we need to look at, braking system would be about 4th or 5th on my list. The first thing that we need to do is we would like the Department of Transportation to put out an emergency order stating that no train over 8,500 feet will roll a wheel until they can comply with the 8,500 feet. Any train that's deemed a hazardous train, we probably should make it 5,000 feet and demand that there a caboose be put on the rear end and have it staffed with a qualified conductor and a qualified trainman.
All right. And question, one of the things that Railway Workers United stands for is public ownership of the railways. And I'm very much in favor of this, especially, after seeing all this and after having to hear that a strike would cost $2 billion a day. For me, honestly, there's not much of a federal investigation that needs to be done. For me, the culprit is the profits and the dividends, and therefore the shareholders and the owners. Yep. So that's kind of a long way and maybe slightly editorialized way to ask, how would public ownership relieve or alleviate some of the safety concerns And what has Railway Workers United said about safety concerns in the past? Thank you, Jeff.
Oh, okay. And what public ownership would do is take the profit motive out of this equation. And actually, it wouldn't cost that much money to do what I just suggested. You know, if this was publicly owned, like a utility, they would probably do something like this and make the railways much safer. Now with the hedge funds and the CEOs involved, this is going to be really tough to do. But you know, the braking system that they're talking about, I would have, if we decided to do it tomorrow, it'd probably take a minimum of 2 years. And I would bet, with experience, knowing how these things work, that it would take at least 10 years to do it. Okay, so public ownership would make sure that we would take these measures and we would eliminate derailments like this. And what was the second part of your question?
What kind of safety protocols and concerns has Railway Workers United spoken to in the past?
On this subject, or just in general?
Surely on this subject and other subjects that the public should hear in general.
Okay, we have talked about the long train issue before, and you know, we decided a long time ago that this needed to be taken care of. This is something that needed to be addressed. You know, limiting the size of trains. Right now, they're running trains 3 miles long and longer, and it just it's
no,
untenable.
that's a scary thing. That's a scary thing to think about as the public, as the community, no doubt. You know, you and Marilee have been on the show and kind of have highlighted, you know, the safety concerns when a train is going through your neighborhood, and you know, the two of you have also highlighted the safety protocols. So thank you for doing that. You know, we hope that Railway Workers United and ideas like public ownership start getting more momentum. You know, I've been secretly thinking to myself that that's part of the reason that the railway owners don't want to draw too much attention to this, because if they draw too much attention to this, public ownership will make sense, and I think it'll gain momentum. My 2 cents personally. But thank you, Jeff. And, you know, we're going to keep in touch and keep, you know, hopefully updated on what's going on with you and Railway Workers United. Thank you for being on the show today.
Okay, and thank you, Rick. If your listeners want more information, go to railroadworkersunited.org, and you can get all kinds of information. I'm starting to write up a resolution on long trains and staffing, so hopefully that will appear soon on there. But you can get a lot of information off that website. Thank you so much for having me.
You sure can. Thank you for being on the show. Definitely go to Railroad Workers United website. Sign up for their email listserv. It's very informative, very helpful. Thank you again, Jeff. You have a good day.
Thank you.
Okay.